edition of Baseball History. I was on earlier today with This Day in African American Baseball History, the November 17th edition. And if you want to hear that, you can go back and listen to that broadcast. You can replay it. And in there, I talked about Elston Howard. Had an interesting story about Elston Howard that you might find quite fascinating. If you're a Yankees fan, maybe you're in New York, you've heard of Elston Howard. Yeah, so he was out of the part of the country I'm from, which is basically he was from St. Louis, but his roots were like down in a place called Sikeston, Missouri. Don't know if you've ever been there. They've got a great restaurant. Actually, there's two of them down. One of them is over in the Boot Heel, close to Springfield, and the second one is down in Sikeston, and it's called Lambert's. And Lambert's is in Sikeston, and they call it a restaurant home of the throwed rolls. So you go down there and you tell them you want another roll, and they throw it to you, right? So they probably waste a lot of bread that way, but hey, they make a lot of bread because they really pack them in. So, guys, I'm going to go through. I want to do something kind of special tonight, a little different since I've already hit some of the highlights of what I wanted to talk about this day in Black baseball history. I thought I'd come on and talk about a 1928 Negro National League All-Star team is selected by William Dizzy Dismukes, and he was the business manager that year of the Chicago American Giants. Of course, William Dismukes was he was a legend in the Negro Leagues. He's a person that I think we should talk more about. He was a great pitcher. He was a submarine pitcher, so that means he tossed them up underhand, and he was one of the greatest submarine pitchers in the Negro Leagues. There were others too. Ruth Foster could occasionally go underhand. So could George Wilson go underhand really effectively. Of course, some of the legends that we know, Webster McDonald, he was exclusively underhand pitcher, submarine pitcher, and so was William Dismukes. So these are a couple of guys that, yeah, I like talking about them. So, hey, guys, if anybody's in here tonight, go ahead and put your name in and tell me where you're listening from, because I probably just popped up and you probably said, who in the hell is this guy? Well, I'm a baseball historian with over 45 years of experience as a Black baseball historian. And I'm co-founder of the Negro Leagues Baseball Museum in Kansas City and the author of many books on the topic. And I would venture to say that I've sold more books on the Negro Baseball Leagues than any man alive. So with that, we're going to jump right in here. Now, this is William Dismukes' team from 1928. This is his Negro League All-Star team. So let's go from first base. He picked a guy from the Kansas City Monarchs, and his name was George Giles. Now, I happen to know George Giles. He was from Manhattan, Kansas, lived around the Junction City area. And so he came to the Monarchs actually at the age of 27. And George Giles knew him very well. He was a prolific letter writer, and I have lots of letters from him. So George Giles, first base, and this was his second full year in the league, so he must have been a pretty special player to get on this all-star team selected by Dizzy Dismukes in 1928. George Giles, had a chance to interview him. Also from St. Louis, second base, John Russell, St. Louis Stars. Now, I didn't interview Russell, but I went to St. Louis quite a bit, especially during the early 80s, and Tweed Webb was there, Kupapa Bell. So I learned a lot about some of these St. Louis players from the people who were actually watching them. And there was another guy named Branch Russell that was on the team, and Branch Russell, I actually interviewed his widow. And so, but yeah, between Kansas City and St. Louis, you go back to the 1980s, and Chicago, of course, there were a lot of Negro League players. So you could go up to that city on a weekend, and you could spend, time interviewing, dozens of players, and you could really leave with a lot of great information. So, all right, so we have John Russell at second base. At third base, we have, what's interesting, we have Newt Allen. Now, I'm not sure why he put Newt Allen at third base because Newt Allen was actually, at that particular time, he was playing shortstop. So what Dismukes did was move a few people around to places that he thought they would be more effective and to actually get them onto his list. So Newt Allen, who I also interviewed, Newt Allen lived on Park Avenue here in Kansas City, Missouri. Graduate of Lincoln High School, originally born in Austin, Texas, and I had a chance to interview Newt. Now, when Newt passed away, I wrote a full-page article about his life in the Kansas City Call newspaper, and that's an African American newspaper, just in case you never heard it. And I do have some people joining me. I do want to say hello. There's Anna Garcia. Appreciate you coming in. There's Holden. I can't sure. Fitzroy. I think that's how you pronounce that. And then there's someone here, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, but some of these are just the names that they use online. It's MOCHI underscore MOCHI. Moochie maybe? Says hello. Somebody says, wow, must be nice to be an author. Well, it takes a lot of work, but I do have some award-winning books. Now, if there's a lot of people who are authors, but they don't have award-winning books, so I'm more proud of the awards because that means somebody else recognized your work. And then I'm going to say hello to one more person. I'm going to jump back in here. Isabella and Leah, some SLIME channel. All right then. Okay. All right, somebody says, do I know Chester Little? I don't know Chester Little, but maybe you can teach me something about him. All right, so we have Newt Allen that he has moved to third base. And normally the Kansas City Monarchs second baseman or shortstop. Okay, at shortstop, he plays a guy by the name of Pythias Russ. Pythias Russ died pretty young. He was from Mississippi, and that's where he's buried now. Pythias Russ was quite the college football player as well. I'm trying to think. I think he went to Wiley, if I'm correct. I have to double check that again. But Pythias Russ, he was a great player. Played with the Chicago American Giants, and of course he came to the Chicago American Giants, and he roomed in the same apartment. Ruth Foster had an apartment. Ruth Foster was the owner of the American Giants. He had an apartment. Of course, I've been there before. And of course, George Sweat stayed in that apartment, and so did Pythias Russ. And Sweat talked about that in his biography that he wrote, unpublished biography. So anyway, Pythias Russ, another outstanding player, guys. I'm telling you, he could also play catcher as well. How about that? All right, so we're going to go to another one, Walter Davis. Now, Walter Davis was named Walter Steelarm Davis. And Walter Steelarm Davis was a great player out of Texas. First came up as an outstanding pitcher, but he was quite the home run hitter. So in later years, he ended up being mostly an outfielder. And he was a great player. So Dismukes picks Walter Steelarm Davis as his left fielder. That's a good pick in 1928. There was a lady here years ago. I was interviewing her, and she knew Satchel Paige real good, and I was at her house, and we were talking baseball. Older lady. She said, "Hey, I know somebody who knew Steelarm Davis really well." I said, "Oh yeah," and you know Steelarm. I think he was murdered 1938 at the Indiana Inn. And it might have been a little later than that, 38, 39, at the Indiana Inn in Chicago, and so there wasn't a lot of people who could really talk about him. George Giles knew him real well, and he would talk about him because they played on the Gickerson Union Giants together. However, she said this lady used to date Steelarm. So she called the lady on the telephone, and the lady began to tell me a lot of things about Steelarm, his family and everything. But the interesting thing is the lady would not tell me her name. And the lady's house who I was interviewing, who knew many of the Kansas City Monarchs, she had been a bartender on Vine Street, so she knew many of the players. She wouldn't tell me the lady's name either. So actually I was talking to someone who knew Steelarm very well, but because it was in her past, she did not want me to know who she was in her presence. So I don't know who that lady was, but I got great information on Walter Steelarm Davis. That guy, he was a great one. He was a great one. Still Arm Davis. All right then, and now moving over to center field, he had Wilbur Bullet Rogan. Bullet Rogan could have been a pitcher or an outfielder on this team. This guy was an all-around athlete. I've written an entire book on him. By the name of that book right there is um, Wilbur Bullet Rogan and the Kansas City Monarchs, and that's the book that I feature him in. And I would say my books are about Negro League Baseball. Now, I have written some things on boxing, but I haven't published them yet. So, but if you look up Phil S. Dixon, you'll see all the things that I've written about, okay? So anyway, that's just a little bit, okay? So that's Wilbur Bullet Rogan, center fielder. Okay, now the St. Louis Stars, he picks for right field Branch Russell. Now, Branch Russell is the one I interviewed, his wife, or his widow at that particular time. Rogan and Branch Russell were both in the 24th Infantry together, so they were two former military men. Branch Russell passed away in St. Louis. So Rogan passed away in Kansas City. So, and it's actually, I know his granddaughter real well. She was over at my house in December for an event I had for when they were doing the Hall of Fame inductions or selections that night. That was the night that Dick Allen got in, and so did Dave Parker. So she was here that night. So was Satchel Paige's daughter and a few other people related to Negro League ancestry. So, all right, let's go to another one. Okay, so for catcher, he chose Frank Duncan, Kansas City Monarchs. Kansas City Monarchs. Frank Duncan, another outstanding person. He went to Lincoln High School, just like Newt Allen did, here in Kansas City. And he was married to a lady by the name of Julia Lee. That's what she went by. She later recorded for Capitol Records under Julia Lee and her boyfriends. And there was a bar here back in the, I want to say maybe it was here all through the 70s, but I actually went down there about maybe 1979, 80, and it was called Milton's. And Milton was the one who booked Julia Lee all the time in his establishment. But going back to the days of segregation, it was white only. And so Frank Duncan, to hear his wife perform, had to get a horn case and go in like he was a member of the band and sit on the bandstand to hear his wife play, because it was an all-white establishment and you couldn't just go there and get a seat and couldn't even listen to your wife. So, all right then. So Anna Garcia says, bye. Thank you for coming in just for a little bit. Be sure to subscribe on the way out. All right. So let's see. So we got Frank Duncan, and that was Frank Duncan, actually Jr. And Frank Duncan, the third, actually played for the Kansas City Monarchs as well. And they were a father and son who played on the 1940 Monarchs together. All right. So, all right, that's Frank Duncan of the Kansas City Monarchs, who was chosen as the catcher. So now we're up to the pitching staff, and he's got a pretty good staff too. He has Willie Foster, who was Ruth Foster's younger brother. He's going to be picked for as the left-hander. He was from the Chicago American Giants. Willie Foster, in the latter part of his life, he was a. Thank you very much, Anna, for subscribing. He was the Dean of Men at Alcorn University, Alcorn State. It's an HBCU. In case you don't know what an HBCU is, that's a historically black college or university, HBCU. And that's where he finished out his life, and he's buried in Mississippi. That was Willie Foster, a great one. He is a member of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Is one of his right-handed pitchers. Now, he only chose one lefty, so the rest of them are going to be right-handed pitchers. He chose William Bell. William Bell's a sleeper. Not a lot of talk about him. He came up with the Kansas City Monarchs. He's out of Texas, and he ended up playing with teams like the Pittsburgh Crawfords, and he was an awfully good pitcher. I think we should talk more about him, and I'm going to do that in the future. So that's William Bell. Just yesterday, I talked about another Bell. That was Julian Bell. I think I need to come on and do a whole broadcast, and maybe I'll call it Ring Your Bell, and I'll talk about Julian Bell, William Bell, Clifford Bell, Cool Papa Bell, and his brother Fred Bell. Oh, there's some great Bells that played in the Negro Leagues. Bell was their last name. So William Bell is a member of William Dismukes' team, and he is a Kansas City Monarch in 1928. Okay, so another right-handed pitcher he had was a guy by the name of Leroy Satchel Paige. Probably heard about him. He was with the Birmingham Black Barons in 1928, and William Dismukes selected him to be his right-handed pitcher on his all-star team for 1928. Satchel Paige, another member of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York. Actually, he was the first Negro leaguer ever selected. Now, interesting, Jackie Robinson played in the Negro League, and he actually was technically the first guy with Negro League experience to go in the Hall of Fame. But the first true Negro leaguer was Satchel Paige, and Satchel Paige also had experience because he went to the Cleveland Indians, which are the Cleveland Guardians now. But and that was part of his career. 1948, he was with Cleveland. So I guess you can say they both played in, Robinson was in the National League and Page was in the American League. So they both had that experience as well as Negro League experience, but Page had far more than Jackie Robinson's one season. So, all right, so you got Satchel Paige. Man, I tell you what, if you're interested in learning about the Negro Leagues, you can start by getting a book about Satchel Paige. And there are many books. I think Satchel Paige has more literature written on him than any other Negro League player. And I don't even know if there's even a close second. Satchel Paige. And Satchel Paige died in 1982, and he is buried in Kansas City, Missouri at Forest Lawn Cemetery. And there are 3 Hall of Famers buried in that cemetery, 2 from the Negro Leagues and 1 from the Major Leagues. The one from that played with Brooklyn in the National League for a period is Zach Wheat. So Zach Wheat's buried there, along with John Buck O'Neill and Satchel Paige. So that I get a chance to go there, and I put flowers on their wreaths, their gravesite often. All right, so we have one last player, and it's going to be a right-handed pitcher, and that's Theodore Ted Trent. And Theodore Ted Trent was one of the Negro League's great pitchers, but once again, he comes up short in the conversations that we have about him. So just know this is someone we should be talking about. He won a lot of games he's in 1928, he's with the St. Louis Stars, but he does quite a bit with the Chicago American Giants later on. And so most people would know him from the Chicago American Giants. He was originally from Florida, and he ended up passing away in Chicago from tuberculosis in the 1940s. But that was Ted Trent. Ted was an outstanding player. Sometimes he was known to take a nip, and that kind of messed up his pitching. But I'm telling you, he had one of the greatest curveballs in Negro League history. So that does it for tonight. This is William Dismukes. And William Dismukes, his nickname was Dizzy. So we'll say Dizzy Dismukes, 1928 Negro National League All-Star Team. So I like running down these because he gives me a chance to talk about some people that typically don't get enough recognition. And in some of these cases, very few people had a chance to interview these people. So as I look here today, I know Satchel Paige's family. They've been to my house. I know Willie Foster's grandson, Doug Foster, Frank Duncan. I know his grandson. Yeah, I was with him up in Detroit. The last time I was in Detroit, he follows me on social media. And then, of course, George Giles had a grandson, Brian Giles, who actually played in the American League, used to be with the Seattle Mariners. So we got, how many we have? We have 1, 2, 3. 3 of these All-Stars that are now enshrined in Cooperstown Baseball Hall of Fame. So Dizzy Dismukes knew how to pick them. But he picked a few other guys that we probably should be talking a little bit more about, and I'll plan to do that. So, guys, I'm out of here. Usually about 20 minutes. We covered a lot of material tonight, so I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll come back. If you like what I'm doing, go ahead and subscribe because That's how we keep this going. All right. Thank you very much. And if you came in, you stayed a minute, or you stayed 5 minutes, or you stayed the whole broadcast, I appreciate you very much. Everybody have a nice evening. I'll see you soon.